So one interesting thing about Kaiser is that we are all batch booth setup, meaning we don't have an automated line. And a lot of companies, large manufacturing companies that make metal parts and need them coated because they don't coat in-house, and they have new big projects that they need to get powder coated, they may be considering us for a job. A good majority of them are deterred from us because we don't have a line. It's one of the first questions they ask. And over time, we've overcome that. In the beginning, that was harder to overcome. But typically, if I can get people to come tour and they not know if we have batch or a line until they get here, that's usually the best case scenario if they're just coming for a tour. Because for some reason, people get turned off when you don't have an automated line, and I'm not sure why that is. I guess I think that your throughput is really slow, or that you're a really tiny mom and pop shop if you're set up for batch. That's not the case for us. We're batch because that's the way it was set up originally, but that has become our niche, our specialty, because we can do a lot of huge parts that other people can't do because they can't fit them on their line. And we can still do a ton of little tiny parts, but instead of them being hung on an automated line moving through the shop, it's just on multiple carts that move through the shop. So it's really the same thing, but we're more versatile because we have the batch area, we have the batch booths that are large, and so we can get all kinds of weird sized parts and huge parts in that most people can't fit through their window on their line. I don't look at it as a disadvantage. Some people do, but so let's compare and contrast what some of the similarities and differences. In terms of the similarities, there's still pre-treatment happening, there's still dry off happening, there's still powder being sprayed on, it's still getting cured, still getting hung, still getting packaged. So everything, for the most part, is still happening, but it's just happening in a different way, right? So hanging the parts, similar, but we're just hanging them on a stationary cart instead of a line that's moving. Pre-treatment, so ours go into a bay. It's a really large bay, so we're not constricted on part size at all, or hardly at all. However, it's a manual pressure wand pre-treatment process. It's not automated. So you could say like, well, there could be some issues. You might not get it as clean. You might not get it pre-treated as well because it's not an automated system, and that's an argument. But in terms of like how many stages is our pre-treatment process, we can do just as many stages as a automated line, an automated washer, and I think in most cases we actually can get parts cleaner because we have an operator behind the wand that's physically seeing the parts and can get in all the nooks and crannies. Again, we do really big, really weird parts. An automated wash system, even if it was a huge opening, probably isn't going to get those parts clean enough because it can't reach all the nooks and crannies. There's just no way you can get nozzles at all those angles. But my operator, Kevin, he can get in there everywhere because he's physically seeing. He can see where he goes. And on top of that, if he's got really oily parts, he's going to see that. He's going to spend more time. He may say something and say, hey, we're not using degreaser on these parts because we typically don't, and it's not in the process. But Jace, these are super, super oily. I'm not getting them clean enough. I can see when I get done and I do my final rinse, it's water on a wax car. It's beading up and running off. That's not what we want. We know the parts aren't clean. Water should be sheeting off. Now we know the parts are clean. So how do you see that on an automated line unless someone's standing there watching when it comes out of the rinse stage? You're probably going to miss that versus our operators in the booth are going to see that right then and there when they're doing their final rinse. We're not clean enough. We can go ahead and spend more time and get it clean. So in that sense, I feel like we almost can do a better job in pre-treatment. Consistency, maybe an automated line would be more consistent, but it could be consistently bad just as easily as it can be consistently good. Kevin, who's our operator and our main one in our pre-treatment base, he's consistent and he's consistently good. We wouldn't benefit from that being an automated portion, especially because it would have to be huge to get all the parts that we do in there. In terms of drying off, it's ours is still an oven, right? We just got to move the carts in and dry the parts off. Same as if you're going to be on an automated line. On an automated line, sometimes there's two different ovens, just like we have. So they use one for draft, one for cure. Sometimes they have to use the same, and it cycles through to dry, and then you got cycle through for cure, and that could be, problematic and maybe slow the line down, possibly. The spraying side of things, so we don't have any automated guns spraying. We have manual operators, but typically on a line you're going to have automated spraying happening for the most part, but more than likely you're going to still have an operator there that's doing touch-ups, doing the hard to reach places. So you still have a guy standing there spraying just like we would. For us, instead of just doing touch-ups, you're obviously spraying the entire part. So again, weird parts, weird geometries, really large, it doesn't work well to go on a line. A lot of the parts we spray, so batch works really, really good for us. And again, we've got an operator actually physically doing it, so they can get in all the hard to reach places. They can physically see with flashlights, like that is light, I can touch that up. I feel like that since we have skilled operators working in our batch spray booth, we can do just as good a job as we could on a line. And in some cases, maybe better because we're looking everything over a lot closer. Maybe we couldn't do that on an automated line, or we wouldn't have as many eyes on it, let's say. Curing process, we just roll our carts into an oven and cure. For us, I would say it might be easier to determine the cure time and dwell time and what it takes to get a part fully cured because we put the parts in the oven and it's stationary. So we move them in, we close the doors, we start a timer. I can tell you exactly how long that they were in there, right? And they weren't moving. On an automated line, you're moving through that the whole time. So now you have to figure out like how long were you in there. If you're under cured, it's because the line's moving too fast. Those are all things that could be calculated out. I would say that's not really an advantage or disadvantage. Again, our oven's really large, so huge parts can go in, no issue at all. And then we could sit and dwell it for a really long time and not necessarily affect the flow of the shop as bad as if you had a line and you couldn't get it going slow enough, right? So if you have to slow your line way down to cure really thick, heavy parts, then that affects everything. Like it's going slower through the pretreatment process, going slower through the spray booth, and that's an issue at that point. So since we have a little bit of discontinuity, that actually I feel like is an advantage for us, especially since we're not doing the exact same thing all day every day. In terms of what I feel like is a disadvantage for us when we're in batch and we don't have it as a line is since we don't have that line constantly moving in our shop, we can run into instances where we're not getting as much stuff done or we're not consistent in terms of how we did the job before in terms of overall speed. Since we have to move carts in and out of the booth, if we're not being really diligent about, finish with that cart, looked it over, move it out, move another cart in, start spraying right away or start pre-treating right away, and there's downtime in between, stop, take a drink, stop, talk to a friend, stop, go to the bathroom, stop, smoke a cigarette, stop, get something to eat, and you're doing that between every single cart because there's a natural cadence and stopping point because cart's done, we got to move the cart out, move the next one in. That could slow us down versus if you're standing there and there's a wall of parts that's moving by you, you can't really leave your station because then parts go by and don't get coated. So in that sense, there's a disadvantage. We have it to a point now where everybody's really hard working in the powder coating shop. Everybody's very diligent. And so we're able to kind of keep that pace and that speed up even with moving carts in and out. We're not really standing around goofing off much or doing things in between carts. We're just, spray a cart, look it over, move it out, next one in, keep spraying. It's very, very short period of time where we're not on the trigger. But there are some inconsistencies with that when I look at order to order. If I'm looking up a past order or we're doing a current order and I'm seeing like, man, this took longer to spray, where are we losing the time? It's probably that in-between time of moving things around. So that is probably the one disadvantage. So in my mind, I've thought about like, okay, so what if we did put in an automated line at Kaiser? What does that look like? The problem with it is it has to be a huge heavy duty overhead conveyor system to hang all the heavy parts we do. On top of that, the booth window sizes for a pre-treatment system and a dry off oven and a spray booth and a cure oven, they have to be huge, literally to the size of what our batches essentially are, right? Like we need the 12-foot tall, 14-foot wide window for some of our parts. So if you're doing that for a huge area for a line, at that point, I just think that it's simpler and actually more cost effective in terms of equipment goes, to just have a batch booth. So that's kind of comparing and contrasting a little bit. When we were first starting and we didn't have as many processes in place and we didn't have as much equipment, I can see where people thought that like there's no possible way that you guys could put out as much as a line could put out, an automated line. But now I would say that we can. We have multiple wash bays, we have multiple ovens. We only have one spray booth, but we run multiple sprayers. So I don't think our bottleneck is equipment typically, for getting a ton of parts out the door, even though we're batch setup. Most new customers realize that once they come to or see how much we're putting through, see how sophisticated our pre-treatment process is, because that's one area in batch that usually gets forgotten about or doesn't get focused on enough, is making sure that you can match a pre-treatment process that happens in a automated line, because you can do that in batch. You just need the right chemicals, you need the right equipment, and you need diligent, well-trained, highly competent operators in your wash bay, and then you easily can pre-treat the exact same way that's happening on an automated line. And so once I explain that and people see the quality of parts that we're putting out, they get on board and say, yeah, I don't see why you couldn't do it. Your batch set up, other places aren't, but if you think you can do it, let's do some samples and we'll do some testing and see how it goes. And it usually ends up going well, but I just want people out there that have batch setups, don't feel bad, that there's definitely a niche for that. Is there a time and a place for a line? Absolutely. Have I thought about putting it in an automated line for maybe a job that's really high in quantity and small parts? Yes, I have. It just never works out making sense for us because, as everybody sees from all of our social media, we're doing huge things. 13-foot diameter tank stand. That just doesn't really make sense to hang that and move that down an automated line. We're doing a 16-foot long duct blind that's 6 foot deep and 5 foot tall, big rectangular box. It just doesn't work well to hang that and move it on a line. 20, 30 foot long pieces of railing. On an automated line, you have all these turns that you have to go around. How are you going to turn this big 30-foot piece through the shop without having this huge open area? We're able to control that a little bit better with a cart. We can steer that wherever we want. So there's pluses and minuses, but in my mind, for us at Kaiser, the batch booth setup that we started with and continue to carry on with seems to be the best way for us because it allows us to be the job shop that we are. It allows us to be versatile. And so anything new that comes in, we pretty much can handle. And we don't have to be like, nope, that won't fit, so we can't do it. And that's how we've grown and succeeded, is because parts come to us because nobody else can do them. Not because they're not capable, because the equipment that they have won't actually process the parts through the equipment because of sizing issues. And we don't have that. So if you're going to do really big and large parts and you want that to be your area of expertise, batch booth setup, I think, is the best way to go. If you want to do a lot of tiny pieces on high volume and maybe have less handling or have less people in the shop for handling, physically moving parts around, then an automated line might start making sense. The cost of entry, based on my research, of a batch setup versus automated setup is probably on the order of magnitude of 10 times. So 10 times the amount to get an automated line set up than it is to get a batch booth set up. And obviously that changes based on brand and stuff. But if I want really good stuff in both areas, I want the best over here on an automated line, I want the best in batch, what's my price difference? I think it's 10x. Batch is the cheaper side. And to me, it's more versatile. So then it's like 10 times cheaper and more versatile. I think that's the route that I want to go with.